This time, the title of my presentation is The Haptic and Somatic Intimacy in Contemporary Art. The title came after my experience, the previous experience, the lecture and workshop last year in Hague. And in a way, during all these events, I realized that I didn't spend enough time with some of the propositions that I gave. So this is a kind of follow-up from the first lecture, but also it stands on its own. At the center of this session is the assumption that it is urgent to re-evaluate the relevance of touch in the arts. Despite the usual conjecture that there is a certain we that prescribes closeness, this lecture is about challenging the notion of intimacy on the one hand and forging the community and collectivity on the other hand, and how they intersect through touch and body. I talk about touching the other, but also touching oneself and self-injury on the way. For a very long time, the touch was prohibited from museums. The awe towards the art objects and the fear from the disintegration of their integrity even today prevent the audience from touching, feeling the museum objects. On the other hand, the audience had always worshipped certain artworks and their enduring materiality that sometimes suffers exactly because of the endless touch. Here I have in mind the famous sculpture Moses by Michelangelo. And it's really interesting how during the time, with time, this endless marble materiality of the sculpture suffered actually from this continuous touch of the audience. And this is a kind of metaphor for my speech, that the touch can also kind of affect even the most durable material in the world, the marble. I want to discuss the possibility of impossibility to establish trust and proximity between the institutions, curators, artists, and the audience, research, and educational projects. I started with the ethical concept, such of, for example, Jean-Luc Nancy's term inoperative community, ecosoma, coined by Petra Coopers, solidarity without intimacy by Francesca Poletta, and Mia Mingu's concept of forced intimacy. All these concepts on their own, in their own way, somehow point out to this kind of a relation between touch, intimacy, and institutions, but at the same time to these kind of contradictions within this kind of pole of different notions. I want to explore the potentials and challenges of initiatives that are based on participation, collaboration, and solidarity, with emphasis on touch and hapticity. Such projects eventually enable social and eco-feminist transformation by overcoming the prevailing forces and means of production and by challenging the relations of art and humanity and human reproduction. However, for better or worse, such projects sometimes invent or forge ties that have been not initially there and drag closer the participants. I say for better or worse exactly because of this possibility to harm, to injure the others. So I want to investigate how we respond to others and to the request to interact with them during projects that these intercorporeal encounters and intensification of feelings that, according to Sarah Ahmed, creates the impression of a collective body. The emphasis is on creates the impression. It doesn't say it creates collective body. So this minor distinction of Sarah Ahmed is really important, that this is impression of a collective body. The issues of touch, intimacy, and trust intersect with rather more general issues as the corporeal internalization of various biopolitical regimes that often hinder the intended solidarity and empathy. So, regardless to whatever we intend, actually, we don't work in vacuum. And this is one of my main questions. What happens with all these fine intentions in the context of biopolitical regimes? I propose to look at the contradictions between the touch and the promise of intimacy on the one side, and solidarity and horizontality on the other side. It's not the same as to say that the political acts of solidarity cannot be intimate, though. However, the criticism of some of these projects regarding the newly constructed hierarchies due to institutional limitations, liminality, lack of accessibility, access, ableism, consent, etc., is as relevant as presenting and or prizing them. So I start with some examples now because I thought that all these general thoughts are okay, but still they work better if you just present some works. This is a very old work by Marina Abramovic and Ulay, this famous uh, pair and couple. It's called Imponderabilia, and it took place in Bologna in 1977. I recently wrote a very long piece about all the implications of this work, the main of it being the audience, the forced intimacy on the audience that has to enter the museum in this very narrow corridor between the two naked bodies of the artist. On the left side, Marina Abramovic, on the right side, Ulay. Each of the visitors had to choose, to which body they should face, because as I said, corridor was very narrow, so they couldn't enter the museum frontally. So, in order to enter the museum, you had to go through this passage in parallel to one of the artists. And an interesting quote I can share with you that Marina gave in an early interview was that they wanted to be the door of the museum. They wanted to present the museum in a way, exactly because of this constant kind of negotiations between the audience, the artists, and the institutions, where usually the institutions acted as a kind of gatekeepers. I can share later your this text once when it gets published with you. So we can now I need to go on. So these are the images from the same performance. The performance was re-performed many times since then in the frame of exhibitions by Marina Abramovic. Unfortunately, Ulay died, and now recently Marina started delegating the performance. So the audience itself, members of the audience could act also as these two gatekeepers. I say gatekeepers in ironic terms because that was exactly what the artist wanted to put under question. Because there were all these awkward situations where the people were not really well prepared about this forced intimacy. And just remember, it was 1977. The performance was actually interrupted. After several hours, the police came and they closed it down. So one of the artists that participated in one of these re-performed actions and was re-performer, actually sued Marina Abramovic for this forced intimacy because he claimed that the artist is, and the museum actually, the MoMA, where this performance took place in 2010 as part of a retrospective of the Museum of Modern Art of Marina Abramovic, titled "The Artist is Present." He sued the museum as liable for 7 incidents, and there were other actually re-performance that experienced a kind of hostility by the audience because even though it was very late, much later than the original performance, and it was the States, they had this really strange attacks that were not perhaps that much physical, but they were creating certain hostility. I want to share now one project that is very dear to me because when I was teaching body art, actually, I would always start my lectures with this reading position for second degree burn from 1970. It's even older work by Dennis Oppenheim, where actually we are not talking about physical touch, but at the same time, it is an early awareness of the damage that sun, the nature, so-called nature that we worship so much, can make over our own body. The impression of the book has so many different implications, not only on the skin, but also as a kind of imprint of memory of this action. So I thought that these 5 hours on the beach obviously damage the skin with this solar energy that is usually kind of celebrated. And speaking from this perspective, 55 years later, we are even much more serious about this. The other work that I really felt like we need to discuss in this context is the Midjoy from 1964 by Karol Schneemann. You see, I don't go in historic way. This performance, or audio-like performance, it's recorded on video, and it speaks about this early awareness of the artist. Karol Schneemann is really important in all history of uh, artistic performances with body. But this is particularly important in the frame of participatory art because it's not only an experiment that Carol Schneemann is doing with her own body. She invites the participants, the audience, to enjoy this kind of fluid collective body, if I can say. I do not anticipate, says Iris Marion Young, my body touching itself, for my habits retain the old sense of my boundaries. In the ambiguity of bodily touch, I feel myself being touched and touching simultaneously, both on my knee and my belly. The belly is other, since I did not expect it there, but since I feel the touch upon it, it is me. You can guess this is a passage from Iris Marion Young on pregnancy, actually, and how body can touch itself. So it's really not about touching myself with my hand or fingers, but the whole body is developing something else, another body within yourself that touches you and you touch it. And for full disclosure, I haven't given birth, but somehow I feel so related with this passage. To go back to Karol Schneemann, the famous performance Interior Scroll, I found this is a very kind of emblematic work when we talk about touch, because she hid this interior scroll in her vagina, and her performance was unraveling the scroll and reading from it. And it is all about this kind of art, modernist art, attack or criticism to modern art. So in a way, she puts emphasis on kind of internalization of all these modernist myths that she, as feminist, objects to. One of the examples is Jackson Pollock that she mentions in this scroll. Another work of art that Marina Abramovic also reperforms quite often is Vito Conci Seedbed, the performance in Sonabend Gallery that was really about touching yourself. It's just an act, a performance act of masturbation by the artist who is invisible to the audience, that walks above his invisible body. And all this triangulation between the institution, the gallery, the infrastructure, the gallery, the artist that is hidden underneath the floor, and the audience that doesn't even see him, for me was really kind of mind blowing when I first found out about this performance. I really want to go back again to Marina Abramovic. This is her solo project, Not Who Do I, an early work that she talks about a lot. This piece, she says, was primarily a trust exercise in which she told the viewers that she would not move for 6 hours, no matter what they did to her. She placed 72 objects, and one could use in pleasing or destructive ways, ranging from flowers and a feather bow to knife and loaded pistol. You can see all these objects here. And she says that the experience I learned was that if you leave decision to the public, you can be killed. I felt really violated. They cut my clothes, stuck thorns in my stomach. One person aimed the gun at my head. What I'm trying to say with this example is that this trust between the audience, the artist, and the institution, the space where these performances took place with Marina Abramovic was really a kind of challenging for the time. And it was like a kind of experiment. She says at a certain point that it was similar to what Philip Zimbardo Stanford prison experiment or Stanley Milgram obedience experiment, both also proved how readily people will harm one another under unusual circumstances. When I say unusual circumstances, it was an artwork, for God's sake. I mean, it's not so unusual, the artist, to make this kind of experiments, but the audience, the role of the audience is questioned in this performance a lot. So there were all sorts of actions that people did to Marina Abramovic, but the most awkward and dangerous was this person that pulled the gun, and that's when the performance was stopped. There were other performances that Marina Abramovic and I did in the late 70s and early 80s, where they somehow experimented with their own energy and with their own trust. And the rest of energy, for example, the performance was all about the trust between the two artists, about this continuous kind of experiment that they did. And now I jump to Mona Fatoum, the foreign corpse, foreign bodies, work that was exhibited in Venice Biennial in 1995. It was a cylindrical sculpture, a structure with a projection inside. So when you would enter inside, it was a very similar feeling as if you were entering the artist's body, because the work itself was executed with this nano camera, where the camera was put inside of the body, exploring each inch of the artist's body from inside out. So once when you entered the tiny entrance, you became a kind of a proxy for this camera, and you could really travel throughout the body of the artist. So it was produced in 1994. Mona Hatoum is, of Palestinian origin. She was a refugee. She left very early in for London, her home country, but she never stopped discussing this kind of very strange living on the border, on the fringe all the time. So this endoscopic camera can be also taken as a metaphor for this trying to move from inside out and to somehow broadcast even heartbeats. This soundtrack that we could experience as the audience was really kind of amazing because you could still be outside of her body and feel as if you were touching her from inside out, a kind of inspection in these internalized traumas, if you want. So the meaning of this work, title, The Foreign Body, is really important. It's like extension of this scientific eye to such point that the examined body, which is nevertheless familiar, also becomes foreign because it becomes unrecognizable to the person to whom it belongs. Because if you see imageries or video of your own body from inside, you wouldn't recognize yourself. It's a kind of revelation of the anomaly which the subjects has no inkling of. Lastly, the term foreign body refers to the onlooker's position within the installation's arrangements. So in fact, the onlooker who becomes involved in the structure endorses the endoscopic reviewer enters into an unknown body, which he or she is invited to probe through images. Whether the onlooker walks around the image by moving about on the inner periphery of the structure encircling the video, or whether he or she obliquely crosses the projection surface, he cannot avoid a confrontation with the body revealed in its biological aspects, the intestines. Lastly, the term foreign body refers to the onlooker's position within the installation's arrangement. The onlooker who becomes involved in the structure enclosing the end video enters into an unknown body, which he or she is invited to probe through images. And now I go back again to Marina Abramovic and her famous Thomas Lips performance, where she actually goes so far with touching herself that she even injures herself by incising this 5-point star in 1975 on her own belly as a kind of a reminder of this intrusion of the state in the ex-Yugoslav country where she originates from. So she does it as a kind of revelation of all these traces of this kind of intertwining between the state apparatus and her own body. This kind of incision reminds us to these traumas that are otherwise invisible. So in a way, she reinforces these invisible traces of trauma, and kind of maybe interpolation that the state always does, but it's not visible to the others. So the artist somehow self-imposed this interpolation and also this self-identification, if you like, with the state at the end of the day. When I invited Marina Abramovic in 1997 in Skopje, actually the museum where I used to work still had one of the, I could say easily, the last room of dedicated to the socialist revolution. And there was one huge structure that you could see on the right side, which was a kind of installation of museum furniture, if you like. 60,000 blood drops were actually symbolized by these bulbs, red bulbs. And Marino was fascinated by this structure, which was not an artwork, it was museum design, if you like. So she exhibited her both stars. One was this communist star, and the other was a pentagram, which is in reverse. But the pentagram was projected on this a huge installation in the museum of the city. So these two installations side by side haven't been done elsewhere because it was the unique museum structure that was the backdrop for this installation. Another artist that worked a lot with this uh, interpolation and the connection between the state and the artist's body and usual citizen's body, if you like, was Sanja Ivekovic. I just came back from Zagreb and I went and visited Sanja Ivekovic and I saw this balcony for the second time in my life, and I was still the same impressed as the first time. This action took place in 1979 when Tito arrived in Zagreb, visited Zagreb, and this performance was titled Triangle. It's a very kind of invisible performance because the artist actually made this performance on her own private balcony at the same time as the long a carpool was moving downstairs on the main road down from her balcony. So she was on the roof by looking at the street, but at the same time reading a book and also performing, one could say, self-pleasing ritual masturbation. And very soon, a policeman from the street came and knocked on the door, rang the bell while she was masturbating. This kind of interaction between the state power, the private space, and this kind of really strange celebration of Tito is now history. Actually, this intertwining between the regime, the power of regime, and this private, the most private touching ritual, if you like, was really important for me for this lecture, because it's not really about only about self-touch. It's a kind of warning that whatever you do, somebody may be watching. And this could have been very unique for ex-Yugoslavia until recently, but now we witness that actually the state became a kind of uninvited guest in everybody's home, and no one single touch, a self-touch or a touch of the other can be done in kind of isolation in vacuum. So the political implications of any cultural space and representational order are mostly hidden, but yet they are at plain sight. To reveal them is one of the main roles of contemporary art and artists. It's not by accident that another artist from ex-Yugoslavia, Tanya Ostojic, projects provoked a scandal in Austria, even though the project was just a photograph that was exhibited as a kind of banner in Walter Seidel and Ursula Maria Probst in Vienna in 2005. It was still a kind of danger. It was perceived as a kind of danger by the state, and this project was forbidden. I was really surprised because, when you live in a country as North Macedonia, you always assume that the West is kind of much more open. And this work that actually somehow referred to a famous artwork by Gustave Courbet that was much older, from 1866, was really made in 2005, and still the state became a kind of felt threatened because of the uh, flag, the reference to EU flag on the knickers of Tanya Ostojic, because it referred to this penetration of European Union in every state in Europe, the desire to control, the desire to have under umbrella all these little states and to control whatever they do. This was, and at the same time, not allowing their citizens to enter EU. So it's one way direction penetration. I talked a lot about the concept of inoperative communities. It's about communities that refuse to be state accomplices. And this is one of my favorite quote by Jean-Luc Nancy. These communities that somehow define themselves by the way of negation, not in positive terms, by this refusal to be accomplices. In this kind of appropriation of the we, there might be potentials for certain positive impacts of a new we, not based on belonging as such, but respectful for the others. Choice to belong or not to belong, and refraining from forced intimacy. This is a we that wants not to belong, Giorgio Agamben says, but to somehow exceed this belonging. Sorry, there was a mistake in the name. Ecofeminism is a practical and logical response to the reality of environmental degradation and this constant desire of the states to intrude, to somehow uh, distinguish, to separate the citizens from the nature, the citizens from their well-being. And ecofeminists see a correlation between the general status of women and society and the exploitation of the environment. The dominance which men have assumed over Earth is reflected in the relation dialectical between men and women. Now I move towards this kind of maybe more ambiguous way of touch between the body and the nature, the influence that body has over nature and the nature has over the body. The basic insights of ecofeminism are that the conceptions of nature and of women have been linked. Earth as female, female as earthly, animal-like. The evolution and abuse of nature and women have gone hand in hand. To overcome this problem, we must analyze and resist both together and devise an ideal which liberates both. The expansion here is that all oppressions, race, class, gender, environment, are linked and need to be fought together. The word ecofeminism is well known that originates from 1974 by Francois Dubon, and its core, it had the notion that women have this relation to nature ground in their intuitive ethics of caring and preserving. She argued that the struggle of women's liberation was inherently anti-imperialistic because women constituted a colonized group. And this notion is really important for me because it's not so much about ecology, but already in 1971, actually during the Fourth World Manifesto Toronto Conference, the notion of women as a colonized people emerged. So it's not only about the nature, the earth, the future of the nature, but it's really about these colonized people, women that live, and the other species that live on Earth. And what is the future for them in this constant exploitation? So I worked a lot, and in my previous lecture, I expanded more on this ecological feminist, different kind of ecofeminist, because there are different terms like ecological feminism, feminist environmentalism, social ecofeminism, critical feminist eco-socialism, and all these different movements differ, but they all have in common this dialogue between feminism and ecology. So I, in for reason of easier distinguishing between all these different movements, I made this dual division between cultural and radical social ecofeminism. And under these subtitles, there are also lots of different kind of movements. But let's stay with this simple distinction between cultural ecofeminism that incorporates symbiology and draws on religious and mythical iconography, and the radical or social ecofeminism that is much closer to my heart and that incorporates environmental activism and action. So, if cultural ecofeminism uh, preaches, let's say, stands for women that do have an essential and distinctive connection to nature that men do not have, which I'm not fully convinced because they somehow point out to Mother Earth as a form of essentialism, and I stand with this criticism that there is a danger to fall in this trap. Constructivist ecofeminism points out to the link between women and nature as a social construction. Essentialism is not true. Women do not have an essential relationship to nature that men do not. Culture has inculcated the feminine qualities in women and the masculine qualities in men. While these are not essential, they have to be recognized and dealt with. So it's a kind of much more nuanced way of approaching this relation between women and nature. So I will skip some of the portions and I will just focus on the radical and social ecofeminists that contend that the dominant patriarchal society quotes nature and women in order to degrade both. To that end, this ecofeminism builds on the assertion of early ecofeminists that one must study patriarchal domination with an eye toward ending the associations between women and nature. And I'm much closer in this the ways in which both women and nature have been associated with negative or commodifiable attributes, while men have been seen as capable of establishing order. This kind of criticism, I think, is much more urgent. That division of characteristics encourages the exploitation of women, unfortunately, and nature for cheap labor and resources. I'm referring here to this criticism of men being seen as capable of establishing order, because this order is on the expense of women, children, and ethnic minorities. And this is really an important notion. So, according to radical feminists, patriarchy subordinates women in sex specific ways by defining women as being whose primary functions are either to bear and raise children or to satisfy male sexual desires. The liberation of women requires the dismantling of patriarchy, particularly male control of women's bodies, and these radical social feminists really kind of advocate for this. In a way, I'm really interested in this control of feminism that departs from both liberal feminism and traditional Marxist feminism by rooting women's oppression in reproductive biology and sex gender systems. So I claim that actually Marxist feminism is not enough, is not encompassing all these issues. So there are basically four principles that we can summarize here, that there are vital connections between the oppression of nature and women. The understanding of these connections is necessary to understanding the two veins of oppression, the oppression over women and nature. And feminist theory must include an ecological perspective, and ecological problems must include a feminist perspective. So we came to this very important kind of wrapping up summary that actually starting from it is driven by the Marxist feminism critique of reproduction, of the conditions of production. It starts from the assumption that every social formation is characterized by a dominant mode of production. So we may say that the process of production puts the existing productive forces to work under determinate relations of production. It follows that in order to exist, Every social formation must, while it produces, and in order to be able to produce, reproduce the conditions of its own production. So it's a kind of vicious circle in a way, the productive forces and the existing relations of production. So the necessity of renewing the means of production to make production possible leads to the ultimate condition for production, the production of the conditions of production. Not sure whether this is clear, but the main goal of this slide and of this lecture is to point out that at certain point we must break this vicious circle. We cannot go on and on by kind of reproducing the very same conditions of production that we criticize. And this is actually the aim of ecofeminism, as far as I understand, how to break this vicious circle. So the promise of equality is inevitably linked to the class issue and the necessity to thrive towards the society's de-hierarchization. It is the ideal and promise of abolishment of the classes, the classless society. And we've heard this story before, how to abolish the classes. That's the main issue here on the one hand, and the continuity of class prejudices and inequalities embedded in the red bourgeoisie phenomenon, how to break with this. This motivated to this presentation. Many feminist artists have pointed out the paradoxical positioning of the female procreativity, care, and other domestic reproductive activities as prerequisites for population quality that are simultaneous and unpaid counterpart to labor. I want to challenge the paradox stemming from the neoliberalist integration of women's reproduction and labor in production of goods and spheres of domestic intimacy, in contrast to capitalist gender-specific division of labor. That's why one of my favorite examples in this section is the ecosexual artist couple Beth Stevens and Annie Sprinkle, who built the community by creating multidisciplinary art projects that envision the natural world and sexuality with fresh eyes. They question the prevailing notions of environmental art, but also the binary concepts of gender, erotic pleasure, and race, and marriage itself. The incorporate inclusive, diverse, and imaginative possibilities for more meaningful and happy living is in the core of their projects. Their body of work promotes love, tolerance, sustainability, and peace. As leaders in the ecosexual movement, Sprinkle and Stevens have written instructions for pleasuring the earth. Of course, with certain irony there, but still, their ecosexual manifestos and vows for marrying the earth are really important. They published them into their book, Assuming the Ecosexual Position, and in 2008, they actually performed, but it's a legal form, this green wedding. So they married the earth. So fertile was their green forest wedding that it gave birth to a whole new movement, ecosexuality. When it comes to saving the planet, eros, and love, they argue are more powerful and more fun than fear. The weddings were well documented on video and photographs, while the full trajectory of the movement, from manifestos and performances to life, is catalogued in their monograph. What does it feel like to cultivate an erotic relationship to Earth, to take the Earth as a lover? They ask. Their dirt bed is a good place to find out, which was a work that was presented in Pristina in the frame of manifesto. So let's go to really an important book by Donna Haraway about situated knowledges, because all these knowledges that I presented here are somehow part also of my own trajectory, my own experience. This term was born of a specific situation of Donna Haraway, her own kind of situation and specific knowledge in scientific and technological, late industrial, militarized, racist, and male dominant societies in the belly of the monster, as she says, in the United States. The notion works on four planes simultaneously, she says: epistemological, ontological, ethical, and political. I would add here, and artistic. So demonstrating also that such planes are interrelated and not separate. So situated knowledges are not only active instruments that produce knowledge, but they are, moreover, the apparatus uh, and apparatus of bodily vision. Vision is always a question of the power to see, how one sees. The power to see is not something inherited in their body. So, with whose blood were my eyes crafted? Asked Haraway. The notion of situated knowledges is developed by Haraway via metaphor of vision. Notions of vision, viewpoints, eyes, and seeing have dominated many philosophical accounts of how knowledge is created, at least since Plato and his allegory of the cave. But she describes how performing the God trick is about enacting a conquering gaze from nowhere, and she is actually attacking, criticizing this kind of universal vision, claiming that each vision is defined by the position of the viewer, not by some gaze from above. And here we come to this work of art by Arto Megoyan and Julia Sarmento at the 2001 Biennial in Venice, where you had also had to walk through an idol corridor that is very tiny, similarly like the beginning slide that and video that I showed by Marina Abramovic and Duai. So the audience had to go between two screens and to somehow pass through. Uh, and on the both screens, you could see the ritual of cutting your own nails. And this is also one of the most intimate kind of ritual that once you do it on your own. It's I don't know about you, I always feel ashamed of somebody seeing me while doing it. So, in a way, this artwork titled Close is a participatory artwork where everybody somehow shares this uncomfortable feeling of this ritual where you uh, not only touch your body, but there is a danger that you will self injure your body. The images take on proportions that render them almost impossible to identify because they are so huge. These projections are really huge. So when you enter the silent corridor, you cannot even grasp which image is part of which body. And this adds to this discomfort. Also the disturbing speech that you witness. This intensity of absence and inaccessibility is important. I came to the last section of this presentation lecture, if you like, and it is a lot about accessibility and disability in museums or in spaces that are assigned for artwork, monuments, etc. I came across to this very deep, profound, disturbing text by Mia Mingus, her book on living evidence, and her actually it's also a kind of online blog. Mia Mingus shows an image, a photo of my wheelchair, she says, in a dark room, silhouetted against a doorway with a large shirt outlined in lights hanging against a dark wall. She is the one who is the culprit, who invented this phrase that I felt so close to, so driven by. It is the phrase forced intimacy and ableist norm. I was deeply inspired by this because it's not only a kind of law school, it's not only a phrase, a term, it is lived experience. of the artist. So, forced intimacy is a term I have been using for years to refer to the common daily experience of disabled people being expected to share personal parts of ourselves to survive in an ableist world. This often takes the form of being expected to share very personal information with able bodied people to get basic access, but it also includes forced physical intimacy, especially for those of us who need physical help that often requires touching of our bodies. And this is another kind of touch that I tried to announce at the beginning of my lecture. She talks about forced intimacy that can include the ways that disabled people have to build and sustain emotional intimacy and relationships with someone in order to get access, to get safe, appropriate, and good access. Always expected to do the work of opening myself up for others, benefit, education, curiosity, or benevolent oppression. I'm reading this text because there is no way to do justice to this amazing text. Forced intimacy is a cornerstone of how ableism functions in an able bodied supremacist world. Disabled people are expected to strip down and show all our cards, metaphorically, in order to get the basic access we need in order to survive. We are the ones who must be vulnerable, whether we want or not, about ourselves, our body, minds, and our abilities, to allow the others to touch, actually. So, this is why I thought that this is really important. She continues, because I am physically disabled and use a manual wheelchair, I often experience forced intimacy when able bodied people push my wheelchair without my consent, or when I am in a situations where I have to be pushed by people I do not feel safe with, know, or who are actively harassing me while pushing me. This often happens when I am traveling and have to rely on strangers for my access needs. Cannot count the number of times a strange man has pushed my wheelchair in the airport while saying offensive and gross comments to me. These are the moments where disability, race, gender, immigration, class, age, and sexuality collide together at once, indistinguishable from one another. Another example of forced intimacy is when I'm somewhere and need an arm to lean on while walking, as I often do, and I have to be physically close to and touch someone I do not want to. And this whole lecture is about touch, but about all these unexpected discrepancies or discomforts that touch can induce. So this perhaps was one of the examples that points out the best or worst in people when they're actually perhaps thinking the best offering, hand, but at the same time not thinking deeply about the possible implications of this uninvited touch. Petra Cooper's in Echo Soma, Pain and Joy in Speculative Performance Encounters goes further, and her actually examples are really important for us because she gives as an example how a work of disabled practitioners and artists came across and as impossible. Their workshop became impossible when they arrived in Berlin in order to visit the famous memorial of Holocaust. So, in the first chapter in her book, she talks about able-bodied people that treat access as a logistical interaction rather than a human interaction. People I don't know, she says, or who have never even had a conversation with me about disability, casually expect to be my access person without realizing that there is significant trust and competency that must be built before that. People assume that I will accept any access again, any crumbs thrown my way, and of course, I should be ever grateful for it. They don't realize that consent exists, should exist in both ends. So talks about, and I'm grateful for this topic and formulation, somatic pedagogy. Somatic education, this is a quote by Martha Eddy, is a pathway to taking responsibility of oneself in the absence of hard truths in an experimentation and playful process. I think that this is really well exemplified with this experiment, this project, Ecosoma, because I've been to this memorial, and even though I'm not kind of disabled, the same as Mr. Cooper's talk about, I felt this discomfort in this memorial. I could not walk all around, and we had very intense workshop with one program. Somehow it turned into a torture, moving around. So uh, Peter Cooper says, we acknowledge the lawsuits brought by the disabled people of Germany who sued for disability access to the memorial and lost. The somatic experience of uneven ground and narrowing passages had been designed as a metaphor. Bipedal people experience unsettled walking, a stumbling gait when they move through the acres of the Eisenman Memorial. What does it mean to have a particular form of embodiment become an emblem for the memory of state terror? It's a kind of a strange contradiction because it's the memorial that is dedicated to Holocaust that killed many disabled people, and at the same time, the disabled people cannot fully experience it. So they wanted to look toward the non-exclusionary present and futures we could build, she continues, out of our different human specificities, in touch with memories of atrocity and genocide. So instead of entering the space of the Holocaust Memorial, we created an intimate and fleeting architecture of bodies, a memorial of life, a practice of peace, a fantastic assemblage, a human braid. We ran a journey to the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin with Holocaust survivors, with disability culture activists whose different body minds meant we had dogs in the braid with us, with transgender activists, and with people with cognitive differences. We ran this in Canberra with Australian Aboriginal activists, with people from the Buttock Archives in Tokyo, with Jewish rabbis, and the Queer Performance Festival in Sweden. And how did they do it? Because obviously in Berlin was not possible. So they used the video, they used photographs. So they reformed their imagined performance elsewhere in different contexts, instead in the blocks of this monument. We speculated about other ways of commemorating state-sanctioned murder. We wanted to look towards a notion of presence and future we could build out of our different human specificities in touch with memories of atrocity and genocide. So they rebuilt this. I felt like really I could end here with this slide that is really important for me by this quote by Francesca Poletta that talks about inventing the ties that bind imagined relationships in moral and political life. She talks about solidarity without intimacy. It sounds a little bit counterintuitive. I do believe that we can learn something about the conditions for solidarity by paying attention to the internal life of voluntary civic organizations. Francesca Poletto was a researcher who researched the different activities and relations among the people who were activists. But it is not the character of the bonds that occur naturally among members that is important, in my view, so much as the norms that are communicated from members' interactions with each other and with people outside the group. Some organizations may promote schemes of civic relationships that are more egalitarian and more committed to unity with difference than is typical. And I really want to emphasize this unity with difference. And this is exactly what everybody has a problem with, but also this is the most challenging and motivational uh, for me, especially when I work with groups that are different from myself. Many of my curatorial projects are with Roma artists, with Roma communities, and I'm not Roma myself. So I had to kind of establish different kinds of strategies of solidarity with the other, with the different. Uh, I see in their activism, Francesca Coletta says, a similar effort to build forms of solidarity that are not based on emotional intimacy. And this is really groundbreaking. I'm struck by activist experimentalism, their effort to develop not just new rules for doing democracy, but also new schemes of democratic relationship, once based on activists involving understanding of equality and solidarity. They style their radical democracies on friendship. And this term became even more important for my practice recently, but not on a distinctly non-exclusive form of relationship, as well as on online networks and affinity groups. And I want to somehow remind you to this concept of Jacques Derrida of unconditional friendship that I subscribe to. So they seek to prefigure politicizers, to show the viability of a radical egalitarian society, but their more tangible accomplishment may lie in creating forms of solidarity that diffuse across activist circles and possibly movement generations. I want to stop here and just to remind you to a fantastic workshop that we did last year in Hague, May Touch You, where in a way I anticipated this new lecture with this simple question, but very important because it's a question. It's not a touch that is not invited. It's a question whether you can really touch the other. So we had this session, and I quoted then, I quote again my favorite writer for now, Alfonso Inges, who warned us in his Dangerous Emotions that every pleasure we indulge in and every pain we suffer exerts power over others. Thank you.